What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The celestial compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Beal. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Beal.
Greetings, Earthlings. Welcome to Celestial Compass. I'm Kathy Beal of EmpowermentUnlimited.net, and we're taking a slightly different tactic for this episode because we're focusing on how an astrological transit is playing out down here in real life. And to do this, I have pulled in an actual in real life friend of mine, Seth Shelden. Welcome, Seth.
Hi, Kathy.
Let me give you a little bit of background, everyone, as to why Seth is here. Now, our focus today is actually Pluto in Aquarius, which is moving our experience of power from top-heavy institutions down into collective action and community action. And Seth is on the front lines of this and has been for a number of years in ways that play out with global implications. And as we were discussing beforehand, perhaps off-world implications as well. Seth is a lawyer and law professor and the General Counsel and United Nations liaison for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017, which Seth actually owns himself. Seth is an actor and co-founder of the theater company Roundup Productions, correct? And he appeared with me as Harpo in the first ever revival of the Marx Brothers' first Broadway musical, I'll Say She Is. So all those different things have to do with the collective. Let me start by putting this in perspective because you don't have any idea what I'm talking about here. You don't follow what I follow, but you've been living it. And I want to give a little bit of background about what Pluto in Aquarius means, and I think you will immediately see why I thought of you for this. So Pluto is a planet that has to do with really big power, and it does rule atomic energy. It rules nuclear energy, and it has a very long. All right, we've just lost your camera.
Did you? Oh.
Yes.
Let me try that again. I was fiddling with my listening settings, but I don't know what I did here. Okay, let me see if that worked. Because I couldn't hear you. But can you see me again?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
I'm assuming you're going to edit this out. Okay. Pluto in Aquarius has, Pluto has a 254-year cycle. So we're in an energy now that hasn't been around since the late 1700s. And I always find it instructive to look at what happened before to see what might be going on now. And in the late 1700s, Pluto's move into Aquarius coincided with the United States actually winning its independence from Britain and going through several different models of how the states were going to interact and ultimately writing and adopting the Constitution. It coincided with the French Revolution and with the experience of power moving and wealth moving from really, really rich and really, really poor and creating the middle class, a centerpiece. It also birthed the notion of democracy during that time and the Industrial Revolution. So really big changes in the roles of groups of people's lives. And now Pluto has only been in Aquarius briefly, not for the time that you've been doing this. I'm using your work as like a symbol, but it's this year, last year it was there from the end of March until early June, and now January 20th until September 1st, and then again November 18 until 2044. So this is an influence that's going to be with us for a really, really long time. And it's going to be empowering groups of people to work together to change their experience of the allocation of power and wealth, and in this instance, lethality, with the bomb or nuclear weapons being involved. So, can you explain to people what ICAN is?
Oh, of course. But let me first say, if I may, just to thank you for having me, and it's really fun to be part of your work as my old friend. I think, and you did so, but let me just clarify at the top, and not so I don't disappoint any of your viewers or listeners, that I know basically nothing about astrology, except when reading my horoscope in the daily news, apart from things you've told me. And but I would also say one of the things I think about a lot in the work that I've been doing is how, as is the case with basically anything, when you're in the middle, when you're on the ground and 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 obsessed with the daily minutia of what you're doing, it's very difficult to sort of step back and see bigger pictures. And I often think about that in the context of, what a historian would say, a traditional social sciences historian would say, where we are and what we're doing and how it relates to the cycles of history repeating themselves. But hey, another perspective that, of course, it's really nice to have you with your background and expertise think about, in terms of talking about bigger pictures and where things fit. But yeah, this is not an audience, of course, that I think typically engages with what we do, or maybe do in ways I don't see. But one of the things, and I'll talk about, as you asked me to, what we do and who we are, when we talk about movement building, is reaching everyone everywhere. And a lot of our success so far, which again I'll tell you a bit about, but I attribute to the fact that we've basically taken this issue out of the corners of sort of locked away hours and just a few people in a few rooms, and try to engage everyone, because I think we've made slow progress on this in history, because we've been convinced as societies, as citizens, that this is not something we're sophisticated enough to engage in, and when in fact what we're talking about here is not something that's special or magical. I use the word magical it's not magical in some sort of um, special way. Weapons are just weapons. They're big. The weapons that we work on or against, rather, are just big, clumsy life destroyers, and that's all you need to understand. I mean, there's nothing more. The science of it, the game theory, it's all, for a large part, a lot of a lot of that is used to try and separate regular people from this issue. But the movement, and we've seen it, in decades past, how regular people get activated on this and really bring about change. And so, we have academics for nuclear disarmament, and doctors for nuclear disarmament, and first responders for nuclear disarmament, and we center survivors in the work that we do from the harms of nuclear weapons use and testing. But hey, we should have astrology for nuclear disarmament, and of course, everyone should be engaged. So, what is ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons? We are an NGO, a non-governmental organization. We are a coalition of other NGOs, really, too. And today, we have nearly 700 NGOs in 112 countries, and these are basically other organizations that work on varieties of issues, but what they have all agreed to work on among them, either as their core issue or as not their core issue, is nuclear disarmament, and pursuing governments, both the ones that are aligned and the ones that aren't aligned, to bring about nuclear disarmament through a treaty that we've all brought into force together in 2017, called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It's a United Nations treaty that was adopted on July 7th, 2017, and entered into force after 50 countries ratified it on January 22nd, 2021. And so here we are, 24, and we have basically 97 countries have either signed it or ratified it, or or states parties to it take legal actions under this treaty, and we have 3 more countries that support it. So the short story is that 2/3 of the world's countries have basically indicated their support for this treaty in some way, and or are working to implement it already. And then, for those of you that don't do UN math, that leaves another about 1/3 of the countries of the world that don't. But here's where we have that collective action from civil society around the world that's mobilizing to make a change. And that's the work that we do. We operate both in this public-facing way, where we're working with campaigners of all kinds to, bring about change in the ways that they can in their countries. Maybe it's, in more open democratic societies, protesting and civil disobedience, and, not in less than that in less open democratic societies. And then we have this less public-facing sort of work that we do, where we're working with the governments to bring about their joining the treaty or implementing the treaty. And we're doing this at UN meetings or other multilateral governmental meetings.
So to put this in perspective, if I could interrupt for a second, the third of the world that hasn't signed on to this yet contains the third of the world that actually owns nuclear weapons, correct?
They are in that set.
They're in that set. And so the 2/3 that are saying we don't want this tend to be smaller countries, or countries that have less power, at least military power. Is that correct?
Well, I'm historically perhaps, but certainly not smaller. I think people often do say that, but it's not actually true, numbers wise. For example, if you look at, say, the 10 largest populations in the world, it's split evenly. The five of the 10 largest countries of the world, not the first 5, are against the treaty at the moment. That will change, and the other 5 are for it. So, and I think that the alignments of power keep shifting. Yes, of course, if you're referring to the U.S., let's say, which holds the second largest number of nuclear weapons, but together with Russia, they hold, more than 90%, almost all of the world's nuclear weapons. And then there's 7 other countries that own nuclear weapons, and then another 6 countries where they also place these weapons, hosting states. Okay, so those countries are in that 1/3 of opposed. But they're, they may be mostly European countries and, the U.S. So you may say well, those are the powerful countries. But I think that a lot of what we're doing is rethinking what power means in a lot of these contexts, and why we're so convinced, that collective action from the vast majority of the world, be it smaller states or otherwise, wouldn't be effective. And we've already seen a great deal of change come about because of shifting paradigms, and and in the context of the UN, which I'm sure the different familiarity among your viewers and your audience, but you have both the Security Council and the General Assembly, and as sort of lawmaking bodies that then sort of they sort of delegate responsibilities to other committees and other groups, and they function in different ways. But some of these institutions are much more democratic than others. And whenever we bring this issue to the more democratic corners of the UN, such as the General Assembly, we see how there's this overwhelming support for disarmament. And I should say too, if you look at statements since 1945, even from those states that are troublesome on this issue today. Everyone at some point or another knows and has agreed that it's essential for humanity to, not necessarily the Earth, let's say, because that will probably, survive long after us as a rock. But I mean, it's essential to the survival of humanity that we disarm that this fiction that, if your audience is in the U.S., I mean, I think many, certainly U.S. citizens have been educated with this notion that deterrence keeps us safe, and it's they're scary things, but good that we have them. and 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 that's a logical fallacy that is more apparent to, I think, much of the world. And when you bring these things and these issues to the people, then you see real change happen, because it's so apparent that the status quo is unsustainable.
I love how your description, completely unwittingly, just has keyword after keyword speaking to what Pluto in Aquarius means: of shifting power, collective action, changing paradigms, the survival of the planet. All of those things fit absolutely, completely. Can we back up just a second? How in the world did you, an intellectual property attorney and professor and actor, end up in this? How did you end up at ICAN?
Well, like you, Kathy, I guess I would, and like most people, probably have many interests and have been a multi-hyphen, as they say, for a long time. But this issue has always been one of my the issue that's compelled me the most, long before I was working on it in this capacity. And when I was a kid, I thought about nuclear weapons, as many people growing up in like the 1980s would have. And but that, I didn't really know what to do with that interest. I did do, my background was in music and theater and film. And then I was juggling that with a law career as well. And so was a law professor for years. And it was when I was teaching law, private law mostly, but some public law, but not anything relating specifically to international humanitarian law, which is what I work on now. But I was doing that through a Fulbright program in Japan. And this was at a time when the momentum for the General Assembly was building to negotiate a treaty like the one we now have. And I was following the work of ICAN that was basically brand new as they were trying to get something like this off the ground. And it was while I was in Japan that, of course, I visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the museums there. And I was just thinking, when I get back to the U.S., because I'm in New York anyway, I've got to find my way to participate in some way or to be supportive in some way. And I just did that. I mean, when I got back, I joined the negotiations and found some groups to participate with. I mean, it was actually easier than I would have expected, and I think that also speaks to the privilege of having having some disposable income at that point to say, okay, I'm gonna not need to work for a couple of months or something. I just want to volunteer, and also being a white guy in a suit with a law degree, and people just sort of trusting that that would be helpful, even though a lot of what we've done has been to center the groups that are traditionally excluded from this work. I think it's good to have people on the team from all walks of life and all backgrounds. So I was very lucky that they would have me. It was a roller coaster from the first second, and I haven't gotten off yet.
And what is it that you're the liaison to the United Nations? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, the team itself, I described the coalition that comprises ICAN, but our staff team is just about a dozen people, mostly based in Geneva, Switzerland, and I'm based mostly in New York. And we kind of trade hats and responsibilities as needed. We all do a lot of things with such a small team to make everything work in such a huge way, I believe. And so for me, I'm our general counsel, so I handle a lot of our internal issues. But also, as UN liaison, I work with the governments and their representatives at the United Nations in meetings about this treaty or about nuclear disarmament more generally. So just to take two examples about this treaty, like we have under the treaty, there's meetings of states parties that happen, where all the states that have joined it get together and take decisions or issue declarations. And in between those meetings of states parties, they have meetings to take forward the work. There's an action plan that was adopted in Vienna at the first meeting of states parties in June 2022. And now a lot of the work has been working groups of states, governments, to take forward the action plan. And ICAN is an official observer of the treaty, the only NGO, along with the International Committee of the Red Cross, that gets that role. So we are in the process, and I am representing us in the process. So I'm basically working with governments every day to implement the treaty, and then also meeting with governments that are not part of the treaty in other contexts. At the UN, there's conferences all year round. So we'll just go and have meetings with the people who are influential on this issue. And like just this week, for example, the Security Council had a very rare meeting on nuclear nonproliferation and disarmament that was convened by Japan, which is in the Security Council at the moment and has the presidency for the month of March. They rotate the presidency every month. Anyway, and I was there because that's a big stage to talk about the work that we're doing and to work with the governments that are speaking at those meetings, and to try and bring more attention to what we believe and what most of the world believes is the only solution.
And this led to a Nobel Peace Prize for the organization. How did
in 2017? So 2017 was a very big year. That was the year that the treaty was negotiated in New York at the UN headquarters. On July 7th, 2017, 122 countries voted to adopt the text of the treaty, meaning it was something that states could then sign and ratify. And in October of that year, October 2017, the Norwegian Nobel Committee saw fit to bestow upon us the Nobel Peace Prize for our work to raise awareness for the humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, and for our efforts to bring about this treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And then in December 2017, we all went to Oslo, Norway, to be part of this insane week of that was receiving the prize. And then there were parades and concerts and academic programs. It was really absurd. Wonderful.
I remember your story about going through customs in Sweden.
Oh, like they were like, why are you here? And I was like, I'm on a Nobel Peace Prize ceremony. They're like, congratulations.
Understated, like the Scandinavians.
Yeah.
So there, you mentioned in this, and that was part of the prize, education of having to do with the impact on people. And it would seem to me there's a lot of historic data that you're dealing with this.
Yeah, sure. I don't know what you're getting at exactly.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, so the education programs are they just across the board, or do you have different avenues that they tend to go? Are there particular incidents out of history that feature prominently in these programs?
Yeah, well, with so many people in this coalition, obviously education looks a little different depending on where you are. And there are some people who are entering this issue from different perspectives. So if it's, in academia, we have many academics in the coalition that about this subject and about what international humanitarian law norms are already around use of weapons of mass destruction. And there's a whole body of law to be taught around that. But I think that our approach also has been successful and noteworthy, in part because we start with humanitarian consequences. We start with helping people understand what nuclear weapons are and what they do to human bodies, to environments, to civilizations, and exactly how they work, and how after we explore that, we ask, what does your government have as a plan to respond to this? What will your emergency services be able to do in the context of nuclear use, whether it's on purpose or by accident, which is the way we're going, inevitable. I mean, it's basically inevitable. I can't do statistics. I'm not a statistician myself, but we've had other experts weigh in, and you have like reports and analysis saying, for example, that a child born today is more than 50% likely to experience nuclear war. You have indicators that are in the popular discourse, like the doomsday clock run by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which says that right now their metaphorical 90 seconds to midnight, which is to say closer to nuclear catastrophe than the world has ever been in history, including during the height of the Cold War. There's a lot of reasons for all of this postulating, but the point is that we sort of are looking at risks and consequences, and then helping people understand that the only offer is disarmament. And we've agreed on that for basically every other weapon of mass destruction. There was this, before our treaty, what we call a legal gap, because we've had, we all agreed that chemical weapons should be illegal and biological weapons should be illegal, and cluster munitions and landmines. And this doesn't, by making it illegal and by creating structures to prohibit and eliminate these weapons, it doesn't always mean, of course, that they all go away instantly. But just like any other law, it shapes the narrative around it, because I think whether we agree or disagree about other aspects of the nuclear weapons infrastructure, I think we would agree that somehow we've decided that nuclear weapons are a different category, right? And that for some reason that makes sense for those, and it's worked for those largely, but it wouldn't work for weapons, and that's bizarre how we got into this mindset. So we're looking to correct that.
And at this point, we're going to take our break. Hang on, people. We actually have some happy-making stuff we'll be talking about. Stick around.
Om Times TV.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again? empowermentunlimited.net.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to Celestial. I'm Kathy Beal, and we're talking today with my friend Seth Shelden, who is the General Counsel and United Nations Liaison for, let's make sure I get this correct, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And the reason we're talking about this is that it is a playing out of the power of collective and community action. That is what's going to be coming more and more with Pluto, planet of power, moving into the sign of Aquarius, the collective. Pluto's also nuclear weapons. Right before the break, we were talking about educational efforts, and I'd like to mention a program that I saw with you at the Japan Society in New York City that focused on the role that the connection that New York City itself has to the whole issue of nuclear power weapons, plutonium, you name it. That was, I had no idea that I've lived for a long time. And I think this is indicative of a lot of the information that is very likely to come out as you do more and more work, that people may learn more and more how their own community has been touched or is involved. And I'm thinking specifically, oddly, if you look throughout the United States history alone, just since the middle of the 20th century, there are instances of more and more information coming out about strange outbreaks of cancer among people who happen to be in certain places at certain times. There is actually a John Ford Western, I should know the name of this, where pretty much every single cast member, including John Wayne, Agnes Moorehead, ended up dying of cancer because they were near a testing site.
Yeah, the Conqueror.
The Conqueror.
Yeah, that's right. That's a story I didn't know actually until recently, and there's a new documentary called Downwind that's telling that story. Well, telling a lot of stories actually, but one of them is illustrating how the first peoples that were bombed by the United States when nuclear weapons were invented were Americans, Native Americans, and U.S. citizens. I mean, these were the people that we bombed, and this year we're all, the U.S. and the world, I guess much of the world is giving awards to the movie Oppenheimer for telling the story of the Trinity test, a bunch of other stories, but I think one of the things that the movie doesn't tell in those 3 hours is how the Trinity test was both in the making of that bomb displaced so many indigenous people from those lands and harmed them for generations because that test actually research last year in 2022 showing that Trinity test, the fallout from it spread to every of the 48 continental U.S. states plus Canada and Mexico. And it's for people that were nearby, and the story that you just told about the Conqueror is a movie they made like a couple decades later or something in Nevada, I guess, but where it was deemed to be safe, but by governments and corporations that work on this issue, but it's not, and the concert you refer to, that was the work of this group that I said that ICAN, almost 7 organizations, the New York to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and which I co-founded with several other folks who work on this issue in New York. We work on a lot of local legislation around New York's role in the nuclear weapons industry and reversing it. Called the Manhattan Project, as we know from movie, everyone, a lot of U.S. people know anyway, but why? And it's for a reason. I mean, it began in New York, and we have a long legacy of supporting the industry, but then also as New York citizens resisting the industry. And that concert aimed to tell that story through a map that we, ICAN, created with the help of our mutual friend Kathy, Noble Diamond as a designer. Since we're talking about this, people can feel free to go look it up. It's at nuclearnyc.com, and it's just this like fun little map in the terms of its design. Tells the story of New York's legacy with and against nuclear weapons, and how lots of radioactive materials made their way through New York and continue to affect communities in ways people don't know, and have this impact that lasts, up to tens of thousands of years potentially.
I have heard a story at a Christmas party, actually, about some student at one of the universities in New York playing around in the tunnels and coming across a stash of some kind of nuclear substance, I don't know if it was radioactive waste or whatever. The tunnels are now closed. I don't know if you've heard that, but it was like, ooh, cool, ooh, look what I found. And he took it back to his dorm room. Now think about that.
I don't know that particular story, but I do know lots of stories like it. And it reminds me of the story that during the pandemic, there was an illegal rave in like a party that people broke into this warehouse in Queens to throw a party. But that's a warehouse that has had restricted access to because it's part of the Superfund site. And these Superfund sites relate in a large part to the Manhattan Project. This is where uranium had been either processed or stored in some way, and has this long-lasting impact that's very difficult and takes a long time to remediate. Well, nothing can be fully remediated, but to make at least somewhat safe for human proximity. And people of course didn't realize where they were, what they were doing, and how many people are at risk all the time because we are so poorly educated about the impacts of weapons. We think about them so often as weapons, and even in our space of experts, where I'm around all these experts, people talk about nuclear weapons as having been used twice, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, did balloons just come through?
Oh, that's bizarre.
I didn't do that. That is super bizarre. I wonder how that could happen.
AI was okay, great.
Maybe it's because there's sometimes hand motions do things. Yep, see? Well, that's fun, except for the fact that it's juxtaposed with
it's the victory sign. Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, that's also the peace sign, but I was using it as quotation marks. And it's quite inappropriate for it to come when I'm talking about this, because what I was going to say was that, people talk about nuclear weapons as having been used, but in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in fact, nuclear weapons have been used over 2,000 times through what we often call tests of nuclear weapons. But for people who are affected by them, they don't really seem like tests. They're equivalent to being used. And the weapons that have been tested, so-called, I won't put up fingers again, are many orders of magnitude more destructive than what was used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
To swing this around, to connect various parts of your existence into one, another educational aspect or potential that you've been involved with, that I witnessed, was the development of a play. It's not yet really a play. It was a reading of a play in development with your theater company that was dramatizing the negotiation role of one of your co-workers and her path to try to get different countries to get to the number to get the treaty adopted in the first place, interlaced with you as a white guy talking about all of the horrible things that had happened in the past, with many disturbing images, things that people probably do not know about previous use.
Yeah, that's this. I mean, it's what's exciting is when other people take up what you're working on and amplify it in different ways. And that was a nice and has been an exciting energy of interest for me to learn about, and then meet this playwright in the UK who has been writing this story about our treaty, and he's been workshopping two different versions of this play. One's a one man show of him that I haven't seen actually, but talking about the treaty, and the other is what you saw, this reading of this four-hander play that's also telling the story of the treaty in these interesting ways, and we're trying to help, see what good comes of that and develop it maybe. But it's so much fun for me to see people telling these stories, and I think that this is what we know from history as well, and maybe you have a perspective from a more celestial perspective, but that, or there's a great poem actually that I sometimes think about because it's so beautiful, called "The Speed of Darkness" by Muriel Rukeyser, where one of the lines she says that the universe is made of stories, not atoms. And I think about that in the context of what we do and how much stories affect change and mobilize people and groups of people to think a certain way and do things, and how they infiltrate our consciousness. And if you look back to the activism on this issue, many issues, but on this issue in like the 60s and the 70s, and how then in the 70s and 80s, all of this like content came out around nuclear weapons and why they were bad. And that fell away, as we haven't been telling those stories recently because it just left the public discourse more. But it just was so interesting, when you think about back in those days, movies from like the day after the television event and Threads in the UK, but to bigger blockbustery movies like War Games, or and now we see this back in public consciousness. So this, to me, like, as long as these stories are being told, I hope the right stories are told, because sometimes we tell them and we still defer to the old narratives that are not helpful in terms of really, I think, bringing about change. And I get excited about the ones that have the potential to inspire people to action instead.
A beautiful Pluto and Aquarius sentiment right there. I would like to talk about a community that I did not even know existed, that you have some involvement with, that came up in the Manhattan event, and that is, what's the role of the Marshall Islands?
Oh, yes. Well, you recall how I was saying how nuclear weapons have been used thousands of times, in fact. And one such story, basically there are 9 nuclear armed states, and they engaged in these tests, so-called, of their weapons, but they didn't do it, over their power centers. Like the U.S. doesn't test in Virginia, and Russia doesn't test in the Golden Circle cities around Moscow. They test around communities that they've basically subjugated to in various like colonial ways, or like France tested in Algeria, and Russia tested in Kazakhstan, and China tested on Uyghur territory, and the U.S. tested first in the native communities of the Americas, but then, like in the Southwest in particular, but then also tested in the Marshall Islands when it was under UN trusteeship. And the U.S. They tested, I think it's 67 tests of nuclear weapons over the Marshall Islands, and we just commemorated the 70th anniversary of the Counsel Bravo test that was done over the Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, which was on the order of 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima by the U.S. And the people of the Marshall Islands, again, for them, it wasn't like, oh, it's just a test. They have suffered for generations what it has done to their land, to their people. They have entire islands that have been obliterated, and they have the radioactive soil and sand from that will never go away, and it's spread to their other atolls, and they have been seeking some sort of justice for decades around this. And one of the things that happened, and the reason you met some of these people at this concert, and I was just in Arkansas to commemorate this Bravo test, is because as part of the legacy of testing, Marshallese people have been displaced from where they were, and they've also been in desperate need of medical attention for, the cancers and other medical challenges that have been way higher in them than the average people in other places. And so they've found, through various reasons, a special status in the U.S., not citizenship, not green card status, but basically to be in the U.S., and a lot of them have built a community in Northwest Arkansas. So I can't remember the actual number, but it's something like almost about a third of the actual population of the Marshall Islands. It's a huge population of Marshallese people in Arkansas, and I had the privilege to be with them and to learn from them, and sort of try to help amplify their stories too. And advocate, I hope, for them as best as we can in this process.
They have astonishing music. Is my introduction to them.
Right, because they performed we had these a couple of musical interludes, including from this one group that we've come to know, Mark Harmony, who is like a cappella singers, all they play instruments too, but they have amazing songs. I'm not familiar with like the oeuvre of Marshallese music generally, but I love these guys. They're wonderful.
And it's MARK Harmony?
Yeah.
People can find this online. I'm sure that there are some performances that people can see. Yeah. It's really gorgeous. So we have a little bit of time left. So there's community building that's happening in the wake of this, is my point in bringing up the fact that all these Marshallese individuals have relocated to a place that probably, I'm betting, nobody who's listening to this had any idea was going on, which would be Arkansas. I lived near Northwest Arkansas for a while, and I did not know that it was there. Producer is saying, nope, he didn't know. So things can grow. I guess my point out of all this is, yes, there's some horrible stories here, and I'm not underplaying that, but there has been evolution and culture relocating and culture mutating, and some attempts to recreate or to create a new way of being together, new communities springing up as a result of this. Do you know of any others? This is pretty much it, right? That for the U.S.
Oh, well, you mean of communities of people who are? Mm-hmm. No, there are many. I mean, I think that these stories by communities that are affected have always. I think it's always true through suffering, communities come together, and they have to change the narrative. And you see this with the Hibakusha, who were the survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki as well. These really, this is a very aging population now, but through many partnerships with groups around the world, there was the Hiroshima Maidens Project that happened decades ago, where there were collaborations to give medical attention to women who were affected by and disfigured by the atomic bombs. But anyway, just communities of all kinds that get built. The Kazakh communities that I've met, it's actually a common story, and it should not be underestimated how difficult it is to be part of that. Sometimes I think we often take for granted the challenges of telling the stories over and over again for these communities, or hearing the stories over and over again. It comes as a great sacrifice to them, but through doing it, they are both building communities among each other, but also connecting with others that can amplify and support what they're doing. And we hope, and we will see with the treaty that we're working on, how it's galvanized change, and it comes at great sacrifice sometimes. Often, I'm thinking specifically of some of the Japanese survivors that I work with more closely, like Setsuko Thurlow, who accepted the Nobel Peace Prize for ICAN when she's 93, I believe, right now, and she tells her story about being 13 years old and when sitting in her elementary school classroom where her entire class was destroyed and somehow she survived. And it's like every time she tells it, it's emotional for me to hear it, to think about what it costs to tell it over and over again. But it's been these stories are such an important part of the movement because, like I say, that's really what to me, our universe is comprised of, and how it relates as well to my interest in arts and storytelling.
It all fits together. So, where do you see your work going and ICAN's work going? Briefly.
Briefly, right? We're out of time. I mean, we advocate through the treaty that we now have largely, and there are other avenues for raising awareness. But the key for us is to, I think, help push things along with both bringing attention to the need for nuclear disarmament and bringing support to this treaty that we're working on. So getting more countries to join it who support it, and then changing perspectives of the countries that don't through the people.
Where can people who've been listening to this and watching this go to find out more information? What sorts of resources are out there?
Thank you for asking. I mean, the quick answer would be just to say that if you're on socials, #nuclearban will lead you to all of our spaces. You referenced our website, I believe, but ICANW.org has loads of resources for people to follow and to take action. I mean, we didn't talk as much about how people can take action, but we have all kinds of initiatives, such as getting your cities to join the ICAN Cities Appeal, or getting your legislators to sign the parliamentary pledge, or bringing about divestment in your or with your banks and your pension funds and your universities, to get the money that's right now invested in the weapons industry out of it, the way we've done for other weapons of mass destruction.
And there are also some more locally based organizations. For example, what's the one you're part of in New York City again?
Yeah, like I said, almost 700, I think, right now in all these countries. So depending on where you're listening from, if you go to our website, you look up your country, then at the bottom, there's like a tab for local support, local organizations. Find ones that you're interested in. The one I mentioned was the New York campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, but in the United States, I think we have like around 60 or so. So listeners can go find one and join them and work local action through them as well.
And do you think there's more than a symbolic effect behind a city declaring itself a nuclear-free zone?
It depends what kind of declaration it is. I think, we've seen those take effect in like the 60s and the 70s originally, and some of them were just like a declaration, and what was the teeth to it, and what did it mean? And I think they still were meaningful. In the case of the New York one, for example, we know that we have been able to point to effects that it's had, like how the U.S. has no longer been, as far as we know, bringing nuclear missiles into the New York harbor. The New York City used to have nuclear missile bases inside of it, in Fort Tilden, for example, Island, and then doesn't have it anymore. There's meaning there, and there's also like some of them have divestment initiatives. The New York City legislation that we brought about does. So New York has around $500 million, we think. We're trying to figure out exactly that number, but invested through pension plans in nuclear weapons manufacturing and maintenance, and pulling that money out has a massive effect on the industry. It's not only about making these weapons illegal, it's about making them irrelevant.
I really thank you for taking the time. I know you had to run from the UN, able to make our appointment. You had told me. I appreciate all of the information that you've given to people, and fundamentally shown us that there is something that every individual can do, that lots of little individual action led to this treaty being adopted, and now lots of little individual action can continue to spread it. Is that an accurate
Yeah, no, that's 100%, I think. So thank you for giving us an opportunity to tell our story in a space where maybe people haven't been thinking about it. But this is, we hope that people continue to see what they can do and to do it.
Well, thank you very, very much. Everyone, go look at the ICAN website and see what's going on in your neck of the woods and do something far more effective than the protest I saw outside what was then the Atomic Energy Commission when I was working in Washington, D.C. Every day at lunchtime, there'd be people on the ground doing a die-in front of the AEC. You can do a lot more effective things now. So thanks, everyone, and thank you, Seth, very, very much.
Thank you, Kathy.
Okay. See you again. Bye.